been wandering around my garden today looking for inspiration of subjects to paint. And we're coming into autumn at the moment, so the colours of the season are changing and everything is looking beautifully rich in golds and reds. And I just picked these flowers because I think they're absolutely beautiful. They're very cheerful, and working with yellow colours, particularly on grey, rainy days, is a very uplifting thing to do. I'm going to show you how to paint these. I've done a small warm-up here, and the main thing we're looking at is technique in capturing light. I have got my book Atmospheric Flowers in Watercolour, which actually has lots of information on painting all kinds of flowers. What we're going to do at the moment is look at how much is too much in the way of detail in a painting. We're looking at less is more, with as few brushstrokes as possible, as little work as possible, but telling the essence of the story. So let's get started. It's quite interesting when we paint flowers, people buy a bouquet and they think they have to paint the whole collection. I often paint the most amazing large compositions from just holding one single flower, because you can turn it and look at it from all different angles. So if you're going to do this, choose one flower that you think suits you best. I kind of like that one, but I can be quite fussy at this point, looking for which is the best one. I think it's going to be this one. She says changing to that one. And all I'm going to do is, I'm not working with a preliminary sketch. I hate that word, I always fall over saying it, preliminary. I'm not going to sketch at all, I'm just going to go straight in with my brush as usual. And at the beginning of every painting session, I always paint something small, just to warm up, just to get me in the mood. So your challenge is to find something, anything, something small that you can paint as an exercise to get into the mood for working on something a little bit more special perhaps. So there's a lot of information in this little exercise that we're going to do. We have a piece of white paper. I'm going to be working with my size 10 sable brush. I'm actually going to be using colours from my palette that are already there, and I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'm just literally loosening up. If we're working in a loose style, we need to actually feel free as an artist when we're painting and not restricted. I've got 2 bowls of clean water here, which is very important. And the first thing I'd say is, where are you going to start on your painting? I'm going to start on my paper just here, which leaves me an option of maybe a second flower here, or a third, or I may just like one. I've got lots of choices to make as the painting evolves. So I'll start with the centre here, and it's a reddy brown. So my palette at the moment needs a really good clean, but I like quinacridone gold for warmth, so I'm going to take that. And just a little bit of, I've got a perylene maroon here, I will just add that to it for a little bit of richness. We'll go in and we'll see what colour that is. I'm looking at the shape of my flower. Now I'm starting deliberately a little bit lighter than that combed centre is, because I can always darken it by adding some purple, but I can't lighten it, so I really need to go in with a base colour that can be darkened. And I don't really want to fuss around too much, so we'll leave that like that. I'm just going to move my flower now so that you can really have a good view of my brushwork. But I'm looking at it all the time. And I notice the base is quite dark, so I'm going in with some purple while this is still wet, and I'm letting it puddle at the bottom. I can even go a little bit darker by taking some nice bold pigment and adding that in, and that will just flood into the brown section. It can't run downwards because the paper's dry. It can only move if I wet that paper and invite it to. So there's my central cone. I'm quite happy with that one. Now I need to look at the yellow petals, which are really, really lovely. And they're, unlike sunflowers, they're long, they're thin, and they're pointed. So I need a gardener to be able to look at this study and recognise this is a Rudbeckia flower, not a sunflower. Now I'm going to say, if your petals start getting really fat and it does look more like a sunflower, then you tell people who look at your finished painting that's what you've painted. But I'm going to try and keep them nice and thin. And take a nice cadmium yellow here. I'm not going to touch that brown centre because it's obviously wet. So we're just going to do, it's a good brush size, the size 10, because it does these petals quite well. Try not to think about it, and don't panic if you do that. I like that, that looks more fun. Take your brush strokes into the flower and out from the flower. Think about your brushwork on this one. Ooh, that's a big fat petal. Maybe that'll have to be 2. We'll join it up. The other side of this top, I can leave that because we're capturing sunlight, so I can leave that little white bit here, but we can just blur that away and keep them different lengths. There we go. I can actually start joining that colour in now and letting it muddy run into these colours here, and that will give me a little separation of the petals. That's rather nice. Love that swirl of water sound. I'm going to do another one before I add anything to this, and I'm just going to repeat it behind it going further away. I might turn my own flower a little bit so I'm looking at something different. So you should be able to talk through the stages yourself. You should guess what I'm doing next now. We started with a light brown. We went in by adding the darker brown and the purple at the base, and we just let that run. A bit more there and let that run in. You can go back and forth between the subjects, go from this one to that one and vice versa. Again, we'll get a few of these petals coming. Keep this free and try not to worry about what's happening. If I lift and change the angle of my brush, I should get some nice different brush strokes. I know from my study that my colour was too pale, so I've actually strengthened it by going in with stronger pigment. Maybe we'll have a few little more petals there. And don't be frightened of the colours running together, because that's what makes it look exciting. Now this one is drying. I don't like that little white triangle there, so I'm just going to bring that colour in a little bit if it hasn't dried. We're working under studio light, so it does actually tend to dry a little bit quicker, and I do tend to forget that. A little bit of water lifting. And then sit back and look at your work and decide what you think that needs. Do you want to do 2 or 3 more flowers? Do you want to leave it like that? It is just a study. It isn't supposed to be a serious painting that you're going to frame. I'm going to take a little bit of water and run that through here. Lift it a little bit. That should give me a little bit of texture and alter the centre. This is wetter, so I should get a better watermark there. And that will give me that lovely feeling of light. And I like the colours running in. I'm not trying to keep them separate. That's actually what makes it look like watercolour. So you can lift the petals a little bit too by bringing some watermarks through here. You could think about a third one just there, but you don't want to have, although when you look in my garden you'll see there's lots and lots of them. If you want to do a great big painting, that's wonderful, but actually for me right now, I'm just doing a quick warm-up to show you how I work. I can blur that in. Now if I'm going to do 3, I don't want them all to look the same. That would be a little bit boring. So this one's going to be insignificant, so it can be paler. Maybe I can take some of this yellow and take a few paler petals and just blur it, just for interest. And I'm not panicking about that little drop there. I think it's rather interesting, so I'm going to leave it. Life isn't perfect, and I don't want my paintings to be exactly perfect either. So now we can start bleeding away. I'll again trap the light on that one by just touching it a little bit and fusing it. You need the work to be slightly damp to bleed away, but if you have massive puddles, you're going to get very strong colour, and I don't particularly want that just yet. Again, I'm going to go back to that and try and lift a wee bit more colour. Soften that too, and start bringing some areas. I call this dancing with my brush, where I literally go in and play a little bit. Of course, the colour's very soft. If I touch this, there's going to be a massive run of colour because there's lots of puddles. You can start thinking about your stems now. I find it easier, rather than putting green in at this stage, I just find it easier to run a little bit of yellow through from that one. That one can run through that petal and come over here, and maybe that one can run over as well, like that. Where you think a line should go, pop a line. And once you're happy with where those yellow shapes are, just do a little bit of blurring. Then you can drop your green in. And for that, I'm going to use my rigger. And I'm just going to add a tiny touch of green because I don't want to overpower the flowers. I've got Cascade Green, I've got Green Apatite Genuine, maybe a little touch of Cascade Green would be rather nice here. And I'm just going to drop it where I've started drawing that thin line. It'll merge with the yellow and it won't look quite so hard as if you went and did a green line straight on its own. Add a little bit of water and let that run into wherever that previous line was. It can even go into that yellow, which would look rather interesting. So it's a very simple little warm-up. I think anyone can do that because it's not really a complex painting. It really is just a way of warming up. And you know, I'm going to put my flower down for a minute so I can just focus on the painting. There does come a point when you're painting where actually looking at the subject, you're crossing a point where the painting's more important than the subject. Now I can put the subject down and make this more of a pleasing composition to me. That area there, I think the stem's too thick, so don't worry. You can just go in with your water and soften it a little bit. That's much better. The cadmium yellow does not want to be lifted because it's quite a stubborn colour. So I could fiddle with that by going in with perhaps a little bit of quinacridone gold, and I could go into the areas of the flower here to separate some of these petals. But you know, once you start doing that, you are genuinely just faffing around for the sake of it. The point of this was a quick warm-up, and I kind of like that as it is, so I'm actually going to leave it. So while that one's drying, I'm going to bring back the little study that I did before we started filming. I have a lot more light in this piece because I did use a lot more water and the colour that went on was a lot paler. I love this as it is, but you may want to add a little bit more detail. And to finish a painting off, see, I love this one and this one. I'd say they're finished. But what you could do is add a tiny little bit of definition to one flower, which makes the others look as though they're in the distance or they're hit with the sunlight a little bit more. So all we're going to do for this is just come in at the base. Only do this when it's absolutely dry. Don't try doing it if it's still damp because your colours are all going to run everywhere again. We're just going to add a little bit just there, and that sort of brings that to life a tiny bit. And now I can soften it with my size 10 and bleed it into the top just a little bit. That's that centre finished, and it looks a lot stronger than the other two. I kind of like the petals as they are, but just to give you one more tip, because this is a teaching video, you can take a little bit of the Quin Gold and go underneath a petal and start making that one the shadow of that one. Likewise, you can do the top of that and make that the shadow of that one. Now you've got an under petal and an upper petal. The only problem is when you do that technique, it becomes rather charming and you think, oh, I'll do it all over the place. And the next thing you know, you've got a botanical painting as opposed to a leaf one. So, sorry, a loose one. I'm getting excited painting and I'm forgetting all about you guys being there watching me. There we go. And I'll just leave that as is. Just that tiny bit of definition takes that little bit further. And again, if it looked too tidy, I can blur that just a bit into the petal. So, two different ways of working. When this is dry, I can do exactly the same as I've done here on top of that, and that will take that a little bit further into being a finished painting rather than a study. It's very simple. What does it take? 10-15 minutes? So I try to paint one thing a day, 10-15 minutes to capture it in a loose way with as little brushwork as possible, and then I make myself put it down and I go on to painting something a little bit more serious. So you try and find something simple to paint every day, whether it's a flower, a leaf, or maybe an object in the house, and we'll see what you come up with. I'd love to see your work too, so don't forget that. Have fun doing your studies.